have a lot of envy for the cathedrals and the high liturgy and mass and Latin. And there's a romance, there's a sex appeal to it that I just like, I love.
Let's talk Catholicism.
Let's do it.
So today we're kicking off our Papal Ponderings Watchalong series. For everyone who liked our Militamen series, this is Militamen for Catholics, or
Yeah,
like the
basically.
opposite.
Yeah. While I was watching, I was just like, there's a Venn diagram of men who go into the armed forces and men who go into the priesthood.
There sure is. And it's interesting, at least to me, that there's still such mystery and myth surrounding the priesthood when it's been around for so long and it's like such a normal part of our everyday life for much of the world. It should be very just mundane and normal, and we should know everything about it, even if you're not Catholic. And yet it still feels, at least to me, pretty mysterious in many ways.
Yeah, which is, I mean, as we've mentioned in the past, you and I both come from an LDS background or a Mormon background, and so we have experiences that are adjacent to the Catholic experience, I'd say. You what was it? You sent me a meme or something that was like, um, Catholicism is to cigarettes as evangelicalism is to vaping.
Yeah.
Like it was supposed to solve the problem, but all it did was remove the element of sex appeal.
Yeah.
And and I would totally agree. And I would say that Mormonism sits somewhere in between that. I don't know what Mormonism would be because we're not technically like an evangelical offshoot. I don't know if we'd be like a crushed up Smarties,
Nicorette? Yeah, I don't know.
or like the pixie sticks where kids would pretend to smoke the pixie sticks on the playground with crushed up Smarties and pixie sticks.
Candy
And
cigarettes. Yeah, yeah.
it's just like a candy cigarette. um, and so as background, like you and I have experiences with a religious institution that has a priesthood that's male dominated, and has cathedral like temples all over the place, and a lot of like mystery on the higher levels, and very hierarchical in the same way that the Catholic Church is. And I remarked to you, I think, in our planning for this one, that like this is a way for us to engage in our own experience slash religious trauma, maybe in a way that it's like cordoned off, or at least safely separated away from our own experience so that we can handle it safely.
Yeah, I mean, I have to ask you because I don't want to share too much of my own experience and just have that dominate, but did you ever have holy envy growing up for Catholicism? Because you grew up in
Uh,
Utah. I did not.
yeah, that's a great question. No, I didn't, because I grew up in the heart of Zion in America, in Salt Lake City. Well, I didn't grow up in Salt Lake, but um, yeah, no, I didn't have holy envy. I had like holy indignation towards them because they were the whore of the earth. Which, when you say it out loud, it's like, oh, F. I'm sorry, all the Catholics that are listening, like, you're not the whore of the earth.
Yeah, I think it's important to note for all of our Catholic listeners and friends. I've tried to explain to some of my friends who are Catholic now just how I grew up thinking about Catholicism because I was like, I don't think you understand the one-sided hatred. I mean, one-sided hatred, there was a two-sided battle, but always like a one-sided hatred that came about because of this Mormon apostle back in late 70s, 80s. I want to say was the first edition of Mormon Doctrine, the book he wrote, which is not condoned by the church. It's just called Mormon Doctrine, but it's not actually Mormon Doctrine. Anyways, in this encyclopedia, this apostle, this leader of our church, stated that the Catholic Church was the great whore upon the earth and it was a scourge and it was evil. So growing up, my parents didn't fully subscribe to that, but I heard enough in church and from other people's parents and friends. I had a little bit of holy envy for was my friends that were Catholic, because growing up in Southern California, a lot of them were Catholic. I just knew that at least for them, they got to only go around holidays for a lot of my friends. I didn't know a lot of like weekly mass goers. I knew a lot of it's Easter, we get dressed up, it's Christmas, we get dressed up, Lent, we do a little bit of Lent, maybe an Ash Wednesday here or there, and that's it. And so that's what I envied. I was like, man, church a couple times a year, that sounds fun. But past that, I really didn't know much until my 20s when I learned more about religion and was like, oh, they kind of have a cool system, you know, all things
Yeah, no.
considered.
I mean, so I certainly in my adult years have developed a lot of religious envy for Catholicism because of the kind of the cultural space where you can be a twice a year Catholic and you're still
Yeah.
considered a Catholic. You can live whatever lifestyle you want to live, and if you just own the identity of like, no, I'm Catholic, no one fights you on that, and that just doesn't exist in Mormonism. And so I have a lot of envy for that, but I also have like I have a lot of envy for the cathedrals and the high liturgy and mass and Latin, and there's a romance, there's a sex appeal to it that I just like I love. And in the last probably decade or so, I've definitely become a fan of Saint Francis, and not just in kind of the bird bath Franciscanism, but in like the mystical Christianity, meditation, like the all of creation is my brother kind of Christianity. Like I love that kind of stuff. And so I these days would consider myself kind of like a hobbyist Franciscan because I don't want to take vows of celibacy and poverty. Um,
Oh,
for one reason or another.
or another. Yeah, I think what's interesting about Catholicism is it's one of the only Christian religions, well, it is the only Christian religion that ties itself directly back to Jesus and Peter in such a direct way. So much so that the claim, legendary as it may be, that they go directly from Peter to their current pope. It is cool to have a religion that says like, "Hey, we go directly back to our leader." I mean, Islam is saying that it has continued in a long line directly from Muhammad and things like that. Um, you know, that is also clear enough, but I don't think it has the same weight as Catholicism with a figurehead in a pope.
Yeah,
Every generation gets its own pope. Each one dies, becomes a new one, whatever else. There is like a direct authoritative line all the way back. Um,
yeah.
and I would also say it's just a great blend, and this is going to offend some people. It's a great blend of witchcraft and monotheism.
Yes. Yeah, it is. Because they've got like you've got the bones of Saint Peter, right?
Oh
That they like
yeah.
are there, and I'm like, wow, this is so metal. This is so macabre. And like you look at their gothic architecture, and you're just like, why are there gargoyles and demons on everything? And yet it's so like compelling.
The first time I saw the relics of Mary Magdalene on display in southern France, I was like, this is so Ridley Scott alien. It's scary. It's H.R. Geiger. It's this black skull, this rotting or whatever else that's now been saved, black skull in this gold iron, I don't know what else, a mausoleum, no, like a figure, a casket, a suit of armor. It is just like you said, so metal. Everything from the transubstantiation. When I've tried to describe to people who are Catholic who've never thought of it outside, I'm like, you do realize there's a Latin incantation and bread becomes flesh. There's a Latin incantation and wine becomes blood. That is witchcraft. At the end of the day. And I love it. I think it's really cool. I think that when we talk about the mass and liturgy, and like we're going to talk about later, the priesthood and that whole setup, there's just a whole old world that still continues in 2024 that we don't see everywhere else. And I think it makes them unique and also presents some unique questions when it comes to media, modernization, and how they have to adapt or have not adapted in the last 20, 30, 40, 50 years.
Yeah. I mean, and like all good like storytelling, it's just it's just a all stories are a canvas on which we wrestle with what it means to be human. And I think Catholicism and the papacy are a really unique approach to that because of the holiness, the profanity, the vows, and the millennia long institutional continuity. And I think all of that stuff is it's an interesting backdrop to tell stories on, especially not just because it's an interesting backdrop, but because it's a real thing as opposed to like the aliens. I mean, not that aliens aren't real. I mean, maybe
Well,
they are.
who knows?
We don't know. But
Yeah.
like it's less fanciful because these are real people, real institutions that intersect with our real world. And a lot of especially a lot of people's experience with the Catholic Church and the papacy over the last 20 years has been through scandal.
Yeah.
And that's certainly on people's minds as they're creating stories about the papacy.
And it's interesting because we see it directly in attendance and the number of people in the pews. I'm going to tag a couple different articles in our show notes about Catholicism, its members, and media. One of them specifically shows the sample of a general social survey and a cooperative election study from the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops. And you see these little dips and spikes all through the years. The 70s, you have a little bit of a dip, it goes back up, a little bit of dip, goes back up. The 90s has a pretty sharp decline, followed by a huge spike right before 2000. Then you have it pretty good in the 2000s until 2015, and it takes a sharp drop.
Hmm.
Now, we see a couple drops before there, which I would guess is stories like Spotlight.
Yeah.
But I think 2015, 2016, you have the actual movie Spotlight coming out at the same time as there are other questions of Pope Francis, what does this mean? More scandals, more stories. And I think with the growth of Instagram and then, of course, later on TikTok, we just see more and more opportunities for people to share real stories and for the narrative to be shaped by the members. And I think that with a already declining religiosity in America and most places in the Western world, we see pews emptying, and there's a struggle to, again, own the narrative and bring people back to the pews and stay relevant in a time and age where it just doesn't feel, to many people, like it is the most important thing anymore. Let's talk about the movies and shows we're going to discuss.
Yeah.
Our first week, we are talking about 2008's Doubt with Meryl Streep and Philip Seymour Hoffman and Amy Adams. Then we've got Spotlight in 2016, Michael Keaton. Two Popes 2019, fantastic film. Then the next week, we're going to go to TV on HBO Max and go to The Young Pope and the New Pope. And we're going to wrap up this series with the new movie coming out on October 25th, which is The Conclave with Ralph Fiennes.
And Stanley Tucci.
And Stanley Tucci, our favorite Italian.
As a queer-coded man myself, a straight queer-coded man, I love Stanley Tucci. Everything he's in, I just love him. He chews it
He's
up.
the gayest straight Italian and the straightest gay Italian, and he's just absolutely perfect. His food show, by the way, with Italy is one of my favorite things to watch.
Yeah, I started getting some of that stuff on my YouTube because I've been like I still have a wealth of tomatoes that my garden is producing because we have a really long summer here in Salt Lake, and I'm like I need to make pasta sauce, and a Stanley Tucci pasta sauce video came up. I'm like, this guy, I like
Don't
this
mind if
guy.
I do. Yeah, much of my Italian vacation last year, I just wrote down every restaurant he went to. I'm like, gonna try this, gonna try that, gonna try this dish. Anyways, for everyone listening, go ahead and go to our show notes where I've got all these movies and shows linked, and then listen to our next episode where we talk about Doubt, Spotlight, and the Two Popes.